Hey guys, my name is Carolyn, and welcome to my channel C2C Legends. Here we talk about some of the gossip and notoriety surrounding some of U.S. history's lesser known figures and take a glimpse into their exciting and often drama filled lives. If you, like myself, are interested in historical lives and legends, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you can be alerted when I drop new content. So, without further ado, get cozy for story time because today we are talking about the life and legacy of humanitarian Clara Barton. Clarissa Harlow Barton was born on Christmas Day in 1821, and she was born into a relatively prominent family in North Oxford, Massachusetts. Her father was Captain Stephen Barton, who was a military man and a farmer who specialized in breeding horses. Her mother was Sarah Stone Barton, a no nonsense woman who was quick witted and short tempered. And Clara, as she was called, was the baby of five children. She was a shy but intelligent child, and at the age of just 3 years old, she began to attend school with her older brother Stephen. She was a gifted student and she picked up on reading and writing pretty quickly, but she was so young that she struggled to make friends at school. That is, until she met a young lady named Nancy Fritz, who became her only childhood friend. Clara was extremely timid and introverted, and when she was not at school, she would spend her time at home, helping where she could on the family farm. As she got older, Clara became responsible for bigger chores like chopping wood for fire and milking the cows. And from an early age, she was a natural nurturer, and she would take care of and help to heal the sick or injured farm animals. In her free time, she would find joy in taking the horses out for a ride with her older brother, David. She and David had a close bond, and he was the first person to take her out riding horses, something that her mother didn't really care for her doing, but her father supported. Her father even bought her own horse, who Clara affectionately named Billy. When she was 11 years old, her brother David was helping with repairs on the roof of their barn when he slipped and fell from the rafters, injuring his head. The fall caused a brain bleed, and the doctors gave the Barton family a bleak prognosis, declaring that they didn't think that David would live. Overcome with fear for her brother's life and a determination to make him well again, Clara dedicated her time to nursing her ailing brother back to health. She would change his head bandages, administer pain medication, and even use leeches to drain the blood from the swollen area on his head. This was a common practice in medicine at the time called bloodletting. Doctors believed that by draining some of the ailing person's blood, it would balance out the fluids in the body and allow the body to heal. All of Clara's effort and dedication had the desired effect, and David survived his injuries, much to the relief of his entire family, especially his younger sister. So, like I mentioned before, throughout Clara's childhood, she was terribly shy and she was socially dependent on her family and Nancy. She was terrified of public speaking and she never chose to spend time with the other children at school aside from Nancy. Her parents found her timid nature to be concerning, and they tried to encourage her to be more social and outgoing and continue her education, so they enrolled her into high school at an all girls boarding school called Colonel Stone's High School. But attending boarding school away from her family had an adverse effect, and Clara began to show signs of depression. She would hardly speak and barely eat. Soon she would be sent back to her family and her health would return. Shortly after she returned to the family farm, the Bartons relocated to help their cousin's widow, whose husband's death had left her with four children and a farm to care for by herself. When they arrived, their cousin's widow designated an old lodging to the Bartons, and Clara busied herself by working on repairs for their home. It is said that even at a young age, Clara was concerned with her impact on others, and she always tried her best to pull her own weight in the family. So she would perform her chores and find other ways to be helpful around the farm. And when she wasn't working on the farm or helping to restore their lodging, she was riding horses with her brothers or finding other ways to stay busy and out from under her parents. Whenever she would injure herself playing or riding with her brothers, her mother would chastise her and implore her to focus on more, quote, feminine activities. Clara's father, though, was less concerned with her tomboyish behavior, and he and his youngest daughter bonded over their love for horses. Stephen Sr. held a tender place in his heart for his timid and compassionate daughter. However, both he and Sarah, Clara's mother, were concerned about their daughter's severely introverted nature. So they decided to have her head examined by the famous phrenologists known as the Fowler brothers. Phrenology was the study of the contours of your skull and how those contours correlate with brain activity and personality. The brothers, Orson and Lorenzo Fowler, did a detailed analysis of Clara's head and came to the conclusion that she would likely lose her shyness if she pursued a career in teaching. So Clara's parents again encouraged her to branch out, this time recommending that she become a school teacher, a career that she would go on to actively pursue, and she became a certified teacher in 1839 at the age of just 17 years old. So during her first year of teaching, Clara began to notice that there were a number of children who were not able to receive an education due to their limited income and availability. So she began to advocate for the eligibility of working class children to receive an education. For the next 11 years, Clara worked as an educator in the Oxford, Massachusetts school district. She was loved by her students because of her relatability and her refusal to physically discipline them, something that at the time was rather progressive because in the 1800s and even into the 1900s, it was common for educators to spank, smack, or use other methods of corporal punishment on their students to enforce their rules. Clara loved her job as a teacher, and to her family's delight, she responded well to the career and began to open up and become more confident and assertive. And she had a positive effect on her students, too. They behaved well and showed strong self discipline and knowledge. Not only was Clara a kind teacher, but she was also really fun. She would create interactive lesson plans that inspired the critical thinking and imagination of her students. In 1850, Clara moved from Oxford, Massachusetts to Bordentown, New Jersey. And while in New Jersey, she again noticed that there were no free education options for working class students. Because of her belief that all children deserve an education, she set out and opened up her own school named after herself called the Clara Barton School. It was the state of New Jersey's first free public school. When she opened the school, Clara expected for a good number of students to enroll, and she was slightly disappointed at her first year class of just 6 boys. But she didn't let the low enrollment hinder her, and she made sure to teach those boys with just as much dedication as she would a class of 100 students. Pretty soon, her students would begin talking to their parents about all of the new things they were learning and how much they liked Miss Clara, their teacher. As word spread, Clara's class size grew, and by the end of the year, she had over 200 students attending her school. Sadly, in June of 1851, Clara's mother Sarah died, which really affected her, but she didn't let her grief get the best of her, and instead she dove into her work as a teacher, doing her best to pour into the community of children that relied on her. Again, Clara's students loved her. She was fun, relatable, and had a knack for explaining complex subjects. The townspeople were so happy with how much their children had learned that they gathered together $4,000, which today would be equal to around $160,000. The town used the money to expand Clara's little schoolhouse into a larger building that could accommodate a larger number of students. But when the fall semester rolled around, Clara received the disheartening news that she would not be the Clara Barton School principal and that the school board had selected a man for the position because they believed that it was improper for a woman to be running a large institution. The board even paid the new male principal twice as much as Clara's annual salary, and they demoted Clara to the position of, quote, female assistant. Clara was not just upset at the loss of her job position, but she was insulted at the slight by the board. After a few weeks of working in an oppressive environment for a condescending principal who had seemingly no appreciation for her, Clara's mental health began to suffer. Soon, she experienced a nervous breakdown, and immediately after, she resigned from teaching altogether. In 1854, Clara was hired to be a recording clerk for the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C. It was a good job opportunity, and she was compensated fairly and given the same pay as her male coworkers. The equal treatment did not last for long, though, and in 1855, a new Secretary of the Interior, a man named Robert McClelland, began making changes to the staffing of the Patent Office. Robert opposed women being in the workforce, and he definitely did not believe that women should hold the same job positions as men. He was a staunchly conservative man, and he did not find Clara's support of Black civil rights and slavery abolition to be very appealing. But she was a great worker and was very knowledgeable of the systems in place at the U.S. Patent Office. So instead of firing Clara, he demoted her to the position of copyist, which was basically like an office assistant. And he also lowered her annual salary nearly to half of what she was being paid previously. And by 1857, the position of copyist had been eliminated altogether, and Clara found herself out of work. So she traveled back home to Massachusetts to stay with family for the next couple of years while she figured out what she was going to do next. In 1860, after the 16th president of the United States, a man named Abraham Lincoln, was elected, more progressive values began to enter into the workplace, and Clara returned to her former position of copyist at the U.S. Patent Office. This time, Clara went with the personal goal of creating space for women in office and government positions. But she didn't remain a copyist for long. In April of 1861, the American Civil War kicked off. The American Civil War was the only civil war ever fought amongst United States citizens. At the time, there was major division between the northern states, known as the Union, whose economy was dependent on paid labor and industrialism, and the southern states, known as the Confederacy, whose economy was dependent on agriculture and the forced and unpaid labor of enslaved African people. The first victims of the war were members of the 6th Massachusetts Militia from Clara's home state of Massachusetts. At this point in her life, however, Clara was residing in Glen Echo, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And it just so happened that the wounded soldiers were being taken to the unfinished U.S. Capitol building, which had temporarily been converted to a military hospital. So Clara gathered some of her belongings and she went to the railroad station where the wounded soldiers were arriving. And once there, she sprung into action, helping to triage and provide basic care to the soldiers. She even transported supplies from the community to the Capitol so that the ailing soldiers could have food, fresh clothes, and medical supplies. Clara recognized some of the wounded soldiers since the majority of them were from Massachusetts. She'd grown up with some of them and even been a school teacher to some of the younger men, so she had a very personal interest in helping them. She rallied some of the other women together and they worked to gather necessities and supplies for the soldiers at the Capitol building. Soon, they had created a group of women who supported the war effort by sourcing supplies from the different towns and nearby states. She would offer emotional support to the soldiers as well, staying by their bedsides and reading to them or praying with them. And she would even write letters on the soldiers' behalf to their family and friends. From this point forward, Clara believed she'd found her calling. She began to create a network that would help her gather medical supplies for the Union soldiers, and she used her own home in Glen Echo, Maryland, as storage space for the necessary provisions. And in 1862, Clara and her network of women would begin distributing supplies that they had stored to different Union hospitals and camps throughout the Northeast. The women called their organization the Ladies' Aid Society. And even though they were providing a vital service to soldiers, they were traveling to camps near battlefields. And a lot of doctors and military leaders felt that it was too dangerous for women to be traveling so close to where the fighting was happening. Nonetheless, the supplies and aid that the Ladies' Aid Society was providing was invaluable. And in spite of some disapproval, Clara received permission from this man, Quartermaster Daniel Rucker, to provide necessary aid and services to the soldiers on the front lines. Several figures in the military and politics were inspired by her cause and would patron her efforts so that she could continue to fund the effort to bring supplies to the Union soldiers. Her most generous donor was a Massachusetts state senator named Henry Wilson. Even with Henry and the other benefactors' donations, the Ladies' Aid Society was beginning to run low on supplies. And after a particularly deadly battle, known as the Battle of Bull Run, Clara knew that she needed to restock supplies quickly. So she placed an ad in the Massachusetts newspaper, and the response was tremendous. The ladies received a large influx of food, clothes, blankets, and medical supplies from all of the Massachusetts citizens who wanted to do something to help the war effort. And Clara worked tirelessly to distribute the stockpile of supplies to camps and field hospitals. And when she wasn't working to distribute supplies, she was working as a nurse. She traveled to multiple field hospitals, changing soiled bandages, bathing, and feeding the injured soldiers near the front lines. The once timid and shy Clara had blossomed and become dedicated, assertive, and fearless. When asked about her determination to continue her service to the soldiers in battle, she answered, "I shall remain here while anyone remains, and do whatever comes to my hand. I may be compelled to face danger, but never fear it. And while our soldiers can stand and fight, I can stand and feed and nurse them." Clara would care for both Union and Confederate soldiers, and although her personal ideologies rested with the Union, she refused to ignore those who needed her aid. In April of 1863, Clara's brother David was appointed to the position of quartermaster for the Union Navy. The quartermaster's job was to delegate supplies and rations to all of the soldiers and their infantry. Clara would go along with her brother when he traveled to the Sea Islands located in Port Royal, South Carolina, and bring supplies to the Union soldiers there. While in South Carolina, Clara made friends with very prominent abolitionists, and she helped to care for the injured Black soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. Later that year, she traveled to Morris Island to treat the Union soldiers that were there. It's rumored that while on Morris Island, she developed a romantic relationship with Colonel John J. Elwell, But nothing seems to have come of their relationship, and Clara continued to dedicate herself fully to her efforts of helping the soldiers. In 1864, Union General Benjamin Butler declared her to be, quote, the lady in charge. She was given responsibility for overseeing several field hospitals stationed at the front of the Army of the James, an army composed of two state regiments from the departments of Virginia and North Carolina. Her reputation grew due to her unwavering dedication to the soldiers that she was caring for. She wouldn't hesitate to put herself into harm's way if it meant that she had a chance at saving a soldier's life. She was often referred to with endearing titles, such as the Angel of the Battlefield. During her service for the Army of the James, Clara faced many life threatening experiences. She was grazed by a bullet that would zip past her and hit the man she was treating, leaving him deceased. And her notoriety would continue to grow after a difficult August night where the number of severely injured soldiers drastically outnumbered the single attending surgeon. The surgeon was running low on supplies and assistance, so Clara did what she needed to do and gathered as many supplies as she could and took them to the field hospital, where she assisted the surgeon by bandaging and caring for the wounded soldiers after surgery. And when the war ended, Clara searched for other ways that she could help the veterans and their families. She soon learned about thousands of letters from the relatives of deceased or missing soldiers. Many of the deceased soldiers had been buried in unmarked graves and declared missing on official paperwork. Clara wanted to get to the bottom of the issue and provide some closure to those families. So she reached out to President Lincoln for permission to answer the letters in an official capacity. Lincoln was sympathetic to her cause and granted her request. As soon as she was given permission, Clara began to search for any information she could find about the missing and deceased soldiers mentioned in the letters. Her effort was referred to as the Search for Missing Men, and she was put in charge of running the Office of Missing Soldiers, the goal of which was to locate missing or deceased soldiers and send official news of their identification to their families. During her time heading the office, Clara and her team were able to locate more than 22,000 missing soldiers, and they helped to find, identify, and give proper burials to over 13,000 deceased men who had been held in Confederate prisoner of war camps. Over the next 4 years, Clara and her team were able to locate and honorably bury over 20,000 deceased Union soldiers. And at the same time that she was running the Office of Missing Soldiers, she was touring the US and giving lectures about her experiences while serving as a nurse during the war. Around this time, she met a woman named Susan B. Anthony, a well known activist and suffragist who led Clara into getting involved in the women's suffrage movement. As a woman who had been demoted and overlooked in her past because of being a woman, this cause truly mattered to her. And as she got deeper into activism, she was introduced to other famous activists for other movements. Activists like abolitionist Frederick Douglass, a famous Black author, scholar, activist, and poet. She'd always been a supporter of equal rights and opportunities for all humans, and Frederick's ideologies often aligned with her own beliefs, which led her to become involved in the civil rights movement. She spent that full year advocating and lecturing while touring the country. But the nonstop activity, long days, and constant traveling began to take their toll on her health. Clara was diagnosed with extreme fatigue and physical exertion, and it was recommended by her doctors that she step away from the work that she was doing. So, in 1868, she closed the Office of Missing Soldiers and took a trip to Europe. While traveling in Geneva, Switzerland, Clara was introduced to a Swiss surgeon named Dr. Louis Appia. He was a member of a recently established humanitarian group called the International Committee of the Red Cross. These two people meeting each other would change history and save countless lives for the foreseeable future, even today. Dr. Appia would encourage Clara to become the representative for the American branch of the Red Cross. He even found benefactors that would contribute to the nonprofit startup. While she was still in Europe, war broke out between Prussia and France, and she went along with the International Committee of the Red Cross to assist in prepping military hospitals and help with the humanitarian efforts of the committee. When the war ended, Clara was honored with some of the highest ranking medals to be awarded in Prussia and Germany. She received the German Golden Cross of Baden, dedicated to war merit, and the Prussian Iron Cross for her heroism and life saving assistance. When Clara returned to the US, she set to work on her new mission to establish an American chapter of the International Committee of the Red Cross. She worked to have the Red Cross recognized federally as a humanitarian organization. And in 1878, she met with the 19th President of the United States, a man named Rutherford B. Hayes, and tried to encourage him to recognize a need for an organization like the Red Cross to exist. But at the time, the president and most Americans felt that the country had finally been unified and that there was no chance of a horrible event like the American Civil War ever happening again. Because of this, President Hayes did not see the need to fund or recognize an organization that only provided service during wartime. But Clara didn't give up. She realized that the Red Cross could be beneficial for the impact not just of war, but of other calamities as well. Events like natural disasters, famine, or other unexpected tragedies. And in 1881, she met with the 21st President of the United States, a man named Chester Arthur. She implored him to recognize the Red Cross as a federally supported humanitarian organization that would provide supplies and disaster relief for any large casualty crisis, not just wartime. President Arthur found that the organization could be very useful and could help the U.S. not just assist their own citizens, but help with disaster relief throughout the world. And on May 21st, 1881, Clara became the first president of the federally supported American Red Cross. And she immediately got to work because the Spanish American War had just begun. During the war, not only did the Red Cross provide supplies and provisions to soldiers, they also aided Spanish refugees that had been displaced by the fighting. Once again, Clara's tremendous humanitarianism was honored, and the people of Santiago built a sculpture of her, which still stands in the town center today, now as a memorial tribute. And this was only the precipice of the work she would do to aid people suffering from every kind of calamity. She helped with crisis relief after the Ohio River flooded in 1884. She led the Red Cross in gathering supplies and food for the people of Texas during famine. She helped to provide to the citizens of Mount Vernon, Illinois, after a devastating tornado in 1888. And later in that same year, she helped to supply medicine to Florida during the yellow fever epidemic. The list of her efforts and accomplishments goes on and on. And she didn't just confine her organization to helping the people in the US, she assisted with disaster relief in countries around the world. In order to make it easier for crisis victims to receive necessary medical attention, she began to network with doctors and nurses and enlist their help. Soon, over 50 doctors and nurses had joined her in providing medical aid to those in need, creating a system of health professionals that would later be named the Conma Health System. Clara's last field operation as president of the American Red Cross came in 1900 when she and the organization provided disaster relief to Texans after the deadly Galveston hurricane left over 6,000 people deceased and displaced more than 12,000 Texan families. The final act of her presidency was to establish an orphanage in Galveston, something that the Red Cross board members did not agree with because it was not in the scope of relief that they were expected to provide. In 1904, at the age of 83, Clara was forced to step down from her position of president at the Red Cross. But she wasn't done yet. After resigning from her position at the Red Cross, Clara went on to found the National First Aid Association, which worked to establish and promote local first aid and first responder programs. The National First Aid Association would eventually be absorbed into the Red Cross. In 1908, at the age of 87, Clara published her autobiography titled The Story of My Childhood. And on April 12, 1912, at the age of 90, and after a long life dedicated to the service of others in need, Clarissa H. Barton succumbed to pneumonia and passed away, leaving behind an impressive legacy of heroism, perseverance, selflessness, activism, and humanitarianism. In 1975, Clara's home in Glen Echo, Maryland, became the first National Historic Site to be dedicated to the accomplishments of a woman. She has been portrayed in several forms of media, including books, short films, TV shows, and more. Clara has 25 schools named for her, as well as multitudes of buildings, streets, public spaces, and organizations. Her legacy of humanitarian and medical organizations have helped to save and preserve human life even until this day. Today, the American Red Cross is the forefront nonprofit humanitarian organization in the world. They help to save the lives of over 5 million people each year. Every day, nearly 20,000 people throughout the world are provided with life-saving aid by the American Red Cross. And they've been at ground zero for the most devastating calamities in history, with over 16 million volunteers and staff members worldwide. And this is all thanks to a timid and terribly shy little lady who grew up to become a heroic force of nature. And that's all that I have for you guys today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you all enjoyed Clara's story. I just think she was so amazing and dedicated to her work, and I really admired her persistence and her dedication to helping others. If you guys liked this story about Clara, please talk to me in the comments. Leave a smiley face so that I know you guys made it to the end of this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep bringing you legendary stories from sea to shining sea. Until next time, friends. Bye!